which choice best describes how text 1 and text 2 relate to each other. So we'll go ahead and read them both and just sort of summarize each one as we go. So the fossil record suggests that mammoths went extinct around 11,000 years ago. In a 2021 study of environmental DNA, which is genetic materials shed into the environment by organisms in the Arctic, this researcher found mammoth eDNA in sedimentary layers formed millennia later, around 4,000 years ago. And I'll come back and talk about the vocabulary in just a minute. So to account for this discrepancy, these researchers proposed that Arctic temperatures could preserve a mammoth carcass on the surface, allowing it to leach DNA into the environment for several thousand years. Okay, so vocabulary, well, we've got sedimentary. And this is just an important word to know for reading comprehension. I don't know why, but standardized tests love to talk about sediments. And so we consult the dictionary. Sediment is the matter that settles to the bottom of a liquid or material deposited by water, wind, or glaciers. And so it can form layers like this, and those layers will then be studied by people who are trying to figure out things that happened a long time ago, like what they're trying to figure out here with the mammoths. And so there's that, millennia, thousands of years, and then discrepancy is a slight difference. But as we get back to the actual passage and what it's trying to say, there's a discrepancy. What is the discrepancy? The discrepancy between when mammoths went extinct 11,000 years ago, but eDNA was found dating back to 4,000 years ago. So that's the discrepancy, the difference, the 7,000 year difference between when mammoths were thought to have gone extinct and when this environmental DNA could be traced back to. So let's look at the second passage. So Wang and colleagues concede, or they agree reluctantly, that eDNA contains DNA from both living organisms and carcasses, but for DNA to leach from remains over several millennia, several thousands of years, requires that the remains be perpetually on the surface. Scavengers and weathering in the Arctic, however, are likely to break down surface remains well before 1,000 years have passed. So they're going to say then that this explanation is not likely, because when I say this explanation, I really mean this part. So I should have pointed the arrow there. They're trying to account for this discrepancy, and they're proposing that Arctic temperatures could preserve a mammoth carcass on the surface for several thousand years. They're saying not likely because of scavengers. Think of vultures or other organisms that feed off of dead animals, and then weathering, just wearing away. So they're going to say that that explanation is not likely. So text 1 presents findings by Wang and colleagues and gives another research team's attempt to explain those findings, whereas text 2 provides additional detail that calls that explanation into question. I think that looks pretty good. It calls that explanation into question. But let's check the others. So B, text 1 describes their study and a critique of their methodology. No. A critique of their methodology would mean somebody is saying, I don't think they should have used this method, or I think they didn't have the proper control group, or they didn't measure this properly, or they didn't take this step that they should have taken. Neither one of them is focusing on methodology, so B is definitely wrong. C, text 1 argues that new research has undermined the standard view of when mammoths went extinct. Nope, it does not. Text 2 suggests a way to reconcile the standard view with that new research. No, the first passage is not saying that evidence has called that into question. Indeed, the first passage is trying to show how this other evidence can be reconciled or brought together with the fact that mammoths are thought to have gone extinct 11,000 years ago. So C is not doing that, or the passage is not doing what C says. And then D, text 1 discusses two approaches to studying mammoth extinction without advocating for either. Nope. It does not do that. It does not discuss two approaches to studying mammoth extinction. Yeah. So it's going to be A. The main takeaway points here, again, I mean, this is a pretty broad prompt. How do they relate to each other? But if they ask how they relate to each other, try to determine whether, first of all, whether they agree or disagree. And if there is some sort of disagreement, what is that disagreement regarding? Is it methods? Is it findings? Is it explanations? And here it really is that explanation. And so that's why it's going to be A.